I was reminded this week about back when I was going to school in Texas. It was an hour commute from where I was at, so I had lots of time to listen to the radio. And so this particular morning, on my way down, I was listening to a Focus on the Family broadcast, and they were talking about some missionaries in Panama who had been kidnapped by military guerrillas in the area and had been held for ransom. And they had separated these missionaries from their families, kidnapped them at gunpoint, were holding them at gunpoint, and were contacting their associated churches in the United States, demanding $2 million for the release of these missionaries. Well, as you can imagine, the American churches, they didn't have that kind of funding, and so there was all the drama about, how are they going to be released and how are they going to be. So I got to school finally, and there was a new student there, a young man, who ironically was from Panama. And he just moved to the United States. His English, he was just kind of working on his English, trying to get it in order. So I invited him out to lunch, and we kind of it was a tough conversation, trying to speak the best I could of that language, and him trying to speak my language. So as we were talking, I told him about this broadcast that I had heard about what was going on in his nation and in his country, and I was telling him about how the guerrillas had captured these missionaries, and they were holding them at gunpoint. They were demanding money, and as I was telling him this horrible story, he just had this look of just shock and confusion, and he's just kind of staring at me blank. And I thought, well, maybe he's offended because I'm talking about his nation, and I didn't want to do that, so I kept, trying to explain the story more and how this is a focus on the family, and the more I explained, it just got worse, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, until finally he finally spoke, and he said, "Why would guerrillas want money?" And then it hit me that our Guerrillas, guerrillas, in his language is probably another word. So all the while that I'm telling him this story, he's picturing apes with machine guns, and they're kidnapping missionaries, and they're calling America somehow, communicating that they want money. And he's probably thinking, don't they want bananas or something? I mean, why do they want money? Classic reality of miscommunication. I did a course some time ago on communication, and one of the things that really stood out to me throughout the course is how much goes into an everyday conversation. How many factors, how much context goes into every single conversation we have, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's email, whether it's messaging, whether it's over the phone, of all the 1,000 different ways that there are to communicate. There are so many different contexts in communication that can go wrong and create the dilemma that I had with my buddy David. There's the physical context. How well could you hear physically what they said? You've got acoustics, you've got noise, you've got things. Maybe you didn't hear everything they said. How much of their body language could you see? If you couldn't see their body language, you're not going to get the full message. Was it overheard? Or was it actually intended for you? That makes a huge difference. Did you catch the proper accentuation of words? Or did you catch the proper tone? There's a social context. Your relationship status with a person. How well do you know them? If you don't know them very well, that can affect the conversation. How well do you like them? If you don't like them a whole lot, that can affect the conversation. Preconceived ideas. Both people in this conversation have ideas that are preconceived that play a role. How good of a listener are you? If you're not that great of a listener, you're going to miss something. Did your mind wander? There's a temporal context. Are you a morning or are you an evening person? If you try to tell me anything in the morning, I'm sorry, I'm not getting it. It's just going to go in one ear, and at least until I get my coffee. Some of you are the opposite. And for you, you're a morning person, and vice versa. The person communicating needs clarity. The person listening, there is the various meanings of words. Words and their meanings change constantly and may be understood differently by each person. Then, of course, there's the cultural context of a conversation. That you and I each have deeply varied beliefs. We have deeply varied values, backgrounds, experiences, and fluency of language, just like with David. All of those factors tell us that if you and I manage to get more than 2 words out in a conversation successfully, we are doing well. Because communication is a very, very tender and delicate role that things can go wrong very easily and very quickly. And when it comes to gorillas, it's funny. But you and I know that other times miscommunication can be catastrophic. And not only can communication become catastrophic, but how you and I handle the miscommunication can be life and death. It reminds me of the 2 priests who were standing beside the road, and they had signs that read, "The end is near. Turn yourself around now before it's too late." So one driver sped past and he yelled at us, he's going, "Leave us alone, you religious nuts. We don't want to hear your message." And then a few seconds later, the priest heard screeching tires, a crash, and then a loud splash. And the priest turned to the other and said, "Maybe the sign should just say, 'Bridge is out.'" Miscommunication and how we handle it can be life or death. Joshua 22 is our text, if you want to head over there. And in Joshua 22, Israel is finally arriving into the promised land. And Joshua there is encouraging and exhorting the Gadites, the Reubenites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And he's letting them know, you guys are on the other side of the Jordan. You're going to be separated from the other tribes. But I exhort you, I encourage you, as you head over that way, trust in God, and He will take care of you. And so the scene begins, Joshua 22, in verse 10. "And when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great, impressive altar." Now, in the Jewish economy, even in our economy, we understand that the word altar is a loaded word. To the rest of Israel, the word altar shouted idolatry. That's what they heard when they heard that these tribes were creating an altar. And you and I understand the fact that words can be loaded. I will never forget years ago, this is before 9/11, going into the airport and being not really smart. We're standing in line and we're making jokes about bombs and terrorists. And literally, as we're joking about it, I look up on the counter and there's a big, huge sign, something, I don't remember exactly, something effective. It is unlawful to joke about bombs and terrorism in the airport. Well, duh! That's a loaded word. You don't go into an airport and talk about bombs because it's a loaded word. The word altar was such. Among us, among God's people, words like liberal and words like conservative, those are loaded words. Just like the word altar, they're neutral, they don't mean anything, but in our conversations, we throw them around and they're loaded. And they don't mean anything. I'm happy either way. You can call me liberal, you can call me conservative. And in my mind, I understand I have my things that I'm conservative about and proud of, and the things I'm liberal about and proud of. Those are loaded words. It's kind of like your child. When your child comes home and says, I hate my teacher. Now, as a parent, you take that statement, hopefully, with a grain of salt. You understand when your child says, I hate my teacher, they don't literally mean, I hate my teacher and I'm plotting against them. Of course, in our culture, that may very well be more real than we think, but we take it with a grain of salt. But we also warn them. We say, don't use that word. Why? Because that's a loaded word. It's a loaded word to say that you hate something. It reminds me of a young man who lived with us as a child. I won't mention his name, but we were teaching him as a child to be a gentleman. And so we would tell him, hold the door open and you're being a gentleman and let someone go first. And we were constantly trying to teach him that it's important that you be a gentleman. So we're driving through Las Vegas on a road trip, and this young man looks to the side of the road and he sees something called Gentleman Club. And the words out of his mouth was, hey, Dad, look, a place for me. Now, that didn't go very well for my wife. She reacted a little bit like verse 12. And when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them. Words are loaded, and words have power, and words can even incite to war. Words have power, and it is amazing how even wars can start. Wars privately, wars publicly, wars globally can start by the simple reality of wars. But did you notice verse 11, what it was based on? Now the children of Israel heard someone say, behold, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan in the region of Jordan on the children of Israel's side. What words incited Israel to go to war against their own people? It was something that someone heard. You've probably been around long enough to know how much damage can be caused by what someone heard. Damage to relationships, damage to families, damage to churches, damage to nations. How much destruction can happen by the simple hearing someone else what they heard. It was the exact reason why Jesus in Matthew 18, when he said, when someone sins, you, Aaron, go to them alone and talk to them about it. Why does Jesus say that? When I hear of someone else sinning, Jesus says, you, Aaron, you go to them alone and you talk to them about it. Why does Jesus say that? Well, many reasons, but one of the reasons is because 9 times out of 10, what you heard someone say was miscommunicated and got changed along the way. I was thinking about doing an exercise of starting with somebody over here. You guys have done that before, right? And tell them something, and then have them pass it along their row. And about this time, we'd find out what was over here. You've done that before, right? You understand how it works. You understand no matter how simple it is of your statement, by the time it gets from here to there, it's different. And what Jesus is saying is because of that, when you hear what someone says, you go to them, and you go to them alone, and you talk to them about it. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to say, oh, I get it. I realize it. Verse 16, this is how they responded. Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what treachery is this that you have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away this day from following Jehovah, and that you've built for yourselves an altar, that you might rebel this day against Jehovah? Is the iniquity of Peor not enough for us, from which we are not cleansed till this day, although there was a plague in the congregation of Jehovah, but that you must turn away this day from following Jehovah. And it shall be, if you rebel today against Jehovah, that tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. Israel is fired up. Israel hears about this altar, hears what someone says about the altar, and they confront them, and they go to them with guns loaded, and they say, how dare you commit this treachery against the Lord? It reminds me back when we were in Texas. One Sunday morning, I arrived at church somewhat early, and as I approached the front door, there was a white rock. It was about, that big, and it had been painted white. And on this painted white rock was the word, scripture Revelations 21, verse 7. And one of my buddies was standing there right beside me, and so he looked up Revelation 21, 7, and he said, here's what it says. He says, but the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their place in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Whoa. This is a little teeny small town in a teeny little church. All of us were standing around in shock, just thinking, what on earth? Who has got, somebody knows something about us, or somebody is accusing us as a church of some horrible things. Who could it be? And we're standing around trying to figure out who said this and who's bringing this, what's with all the hatred? And somebody would go so far as to paint a rock and write this verse against us and put it on our front door. And then as we're standing there, we're just confused. Finally, Timothy says, oh, whoops, I read the wrong verse. This is verse 7. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. Whew! Relief. Miscommunication. And they came with their guns raging, and they were ready for war. But notice their response, verse 22. The Lord God of gods, Jehovah God of gods, he knows, and let Israel know, if it is in rebellion or if in treachery against Jehovah, do not save us this day. If we have built ourselves an altar to turn from following Jehovah, or if to offer on it burnt offerings or grain offerings, or to offer peace offerings on it, let Jehovah himself require an account. But in fact, we have done it for fear, for a reason, saying, in time to come, your descendants may speak to our descendants, saying, what have you to do with Jehovah God of Israel? For Jehovah has made the Jordan a border between you and us, the children of Reuben and children of Gad. You have no part in Jehovah, so your descendants would make our descendants cease fearing Jehovah. Israel was incited to war because of miscommunication of words and because of what they heard someone say. But they didn't get it. It was miscommunicated. It was misunderstood. And as a result, they were humbled because they jumped the gun. Reminds me of the floor manager who overheard one of his clerks saying, no, we haven't had any for a while. We're out of it. I don't know when we're going to get some. Well, the floor manager immediately ran over and pushed the clerk aside and said to the customer, I'm so sorry. Yes, we're temporarily out of that. It's on order. It'll be here shortly, and we'll have it for you, and we promise that we'll have it for you. And so the customer kind of turned a little bit upset, and he turned to the clerk and said, don't you ever tell a customer that we are out of something and that we don't have it. You always tell them that we're temporarily out and it's going to be coming soon and it's on order. So now, what was it that they were asking for? Clerk, trying to keep a straight face, said, rain. When are we going to get some rain? You've been there, haven't you? You've been in those times in your life where you heard something, you reacted to what you heard, and you jumped the gun. And what is even worse than that is rather than the wisdom of Jesus, we heard, we jumped the gun, and instead of going to that person, which Israel wisely did, we go to each other. And we talk amongst each other about what we heard. And Jesus says, if you want to be my people, when you hear those words, you go to them and them alone, and you talk about it. Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 in the classic love text made a statement in the middle of that text that would solve so many issues with miscommunication. And he said, love believes all things. Love believes all things. We live in a generation in which we are fed from every angle, from the media, constantly filling our lives with gossip and headlines about this and about that and all the stuff. And we as human beings, we as Americans are so quick, so prone to buy into it and to believe the worst and feed and be fed and take it in. And we do the same thing with each other. And we hear things about one another. We hear things about other people. And we immediately think the worst. And we hear it about people we don't know. We hear it about people we do know. And we immediately begin to think the worst. Why? Because the worst is more fun. The worst is more fun. That's why the news is always bad. Because that's what we like. We like it. But Paul declares, the Holy Spirit declares, that love believes all things. Love looks for the best. Love gives the benefit of the doubt so that when our children come and say, I hate my teacher, because we love them, we believe what they're saying. Think about that as we sing our song. Let's stand.